This is a KUNV Studios original program.
The content of this program does not reflect the views or opinions of 91.5 Jazz and More, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, or the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education.
Lights, camera, action. Welcome to Rebel Film Friday. We talk about films of all kinds every Friday at 6 p.m. And I'm your host, Cameron. Hello, Rebels, and welcome back to Rebel Film Friday. I am once again your host, Cameron Margolis, and I am joined today by Jaden Simpson.
Hello.
And today, for our second and last film of Romance Month in February, we're feeling like the king of the world because we're discussing Titanic. Released in 1997 and directed by James Cameron, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, and Billy Zane, Titanic is a cultural landmark of cinema. It was the first movie to break the $1 billion mark at the box office worldwide, and it tied Ben-Hur and Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King for most Oscars won, with 11 at the 70th Academy Awards. If you haven't watched the movie, we highly recommend watching it before listening to this episode, because we'll be spoiling the entirety of it. But, if you need a refresher, Titanic is about a group of scientists exploring the wreckage of the sunken Titanic in search of a precious jewel called the Heart of the Ocean. As they're searching the ship, they find a picture of a lady wearing a necklace that matches the Heart of the Ocean. That lady's name is Rose, who is still alive and goes to tell the scientists about her voyage on the Titanic and how she survived. The rest of the story is told in a flashback, with the 17-year-old Rose boarding the Titanic with her rich fiancé Cal, whom she is forced to marry to save her family's fortune, and who gives her the Heart of the Ocean necklace. On board, she tries to end her life by jumping overboard to get away from all of it, when she meets Jack, a 20-year-old who won his third-class ticket in a poker game minutes before the Titanic set to sea. Jack saves her, and they have a star-crossed love affair until the Titanic hits an iceberg and causes it to sink. As explained to Rose earlier in the movie, there aren't enough lifeboats to save everyone on board because the designers thought too many boats would clutter the deck. So, Jack and Rose plunge into the frigid ocean, where Jack freezes to death, and Rose uses a door to save herself until a boat picks her up. Back in present day, Rose, still with the Heart of the Ocean necklace, casts into the sea to show her love for Jack, and then dies in her sleep. And that's about the entire movie, so without further ado, let's talk about it. First question. One of the most infamous scenes from Titanic is the scene where Jack and Rose try to save themselves by fitting on a door that is floating on the ocean. Rose gets on the door first, followed by Jack, but then the door starts tipping, with Jack on it, so Jack, in a noble sacrifice, decides to stay in the frigid waters, while Rose goes up on the door, Jack freezes to death, and Rose is saved by the boats that come in like 30 minutes-ish. So it's been debated over the years whether Jack could have made it on the door. It's one of the most popular fan theories in film. Could Jack have stayed on the door? So what do you think?
I think he absolutely could have survived. If not that the door could have held him on its own, he could have used a life vest to add to the buoyancy of the door and stay afloat on it with Rose. But no, he just had to stay in the water, be the hero.
I disagree. I think that even though there's technically room, I think that the door wouldn't be buoyant enough to support both of them. I mean, when you look at the size of the door, there was obviously room for him, but when he got on and they both were on, they were tipping the entire time. So I don't think that it would be enough to keep them both afloat.
You think so?
Yeah, and in fact, James Cameron did a forensic analysis study on, would this actually, work? Would they both be able to fit on the door? Because he was tired of people saying that they both couldn't fit on the door, or that they both could fit on the door. So he did a forensic analysis study, and it proved that they couldn't.
The door is a practical piece, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So did they use the same door for the study, is my question.
I don't know, actually. That is a good question. I know Mythbusters tested it, and that's what you were talking about with them using the life jacket.
Yeah, for the boys.
That's what Mythbusters tested, and they said it'd be fine. But I don't know exactly what James Cameron did for his forensic analysis. All I could tell is that was done out of spite.
Yeah.
He was so tired of people saying that they both could have made it on the door.
He was over that.
Yeah, he was completely over it. However, I think another point to why they probably couldn't both fit on the door, and it kind of counteracts the idea of using the life preserver to cause the buoyancy of the door to float up more, is they are in frigid waters, right? And Jack said earlier, when you hit those waters, it's hard for you to think. So the immediate idea is get on the door. But they didn't think about oh, we could use this life preserver and it would help float the door up because they're freezing to death.
I can see how that would be very difficult to think about while you're freezing to death. But another thing they could have done is gathered debris, because there's debris scattered all over the place over here. I feel like they could have gathered it to make some sort of makeshift raft alongside any life vests.
That's true. I think we were talking about, like, the entire time we were watching the film, we were just talking about, like, there are so many pieces of wreckage that are technically buoyant, like the chairs, dining tables, mattresses. Anyone could have used these and they would have been fine.
I don't agree with mattresses. The mattresses will gather water and they will sink like a rock.
But they won't gather water immediately.
Not immediately, no. That's fair. They might have a little bit of lifetime on the surface of the water, but then they're gone.
Well, you don't need it to be a raft. All you need it to be is you just need it to float for a while. Mm-hmm. And you needed to float for long enough for you to be saved. And I think the mattress would have done that perfectly.
Anything cushiony or clothy, I feel like that would just gather water, absorb water, faster than I believe you think it might, and fall.
It's true. It's true. And something else I wanted to bring up is they didn't actually float on a door. They floated on the door frame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They didn't, like, the actual door, I'm pretty sure it was, like, metal.
Yeah.
And that would have sank so fast.
That would have just
But they were floating on, like, wood. Which is buoyant, but I don't think is buoyant enough to keep two people to, like, looking at the size of it. All right, so next question. Of course, this is Romance Month, so we have to talk about the relationship in the movie between Jack and Rose. And they both fit in to this kind of trope that we see a lot in media, in literary works, the forbidden love trope, right? We see it in stuff like Romeo and Juliet. And in this movie, Jack and Rose separated in two different worlds. Rose's rich fiancé and mother in one world, and then Jack's in a separate world, and they have this forbidden love that they cannot meet. And what do you think is just, like, the appeal of this kind of story? Like, why do we keep coming back to stories about forbidden love, like Romeo and Juliet, or like Titanic?
It's a very enthralling kind of story. It's just, it adds so much interest into it. It also creates characters we can, like, memorably hate, like the mother and Cal. They're so hateable that it's just that much more memorable. And then, of course, the love itself is memorable, but the appeal to that would just be a big middle finger to the establishment, I guess, to the hierarchy, I should say.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the conflict it causes, because the thing that really makes stories go around is conflict. Mm-hmm. And seeing this conflict of, oh, there's these two different worlds that are colliding. It's this love. And especially with, like, having a hateable character like Cal. And can I just say, Cal is just the worst.
Oh my God.
He's misogynistic. He's just terrible. He slaps Rose multiple times. He's just a bad dude. I do not like him at all. I really wanted to see him bited at some point, but no, that didn't happen.
He bit something.
He did. He did. But seeing him use the child, I think, was what really made me hate him.
No.
Using the child to get aboard the lifeboats is such, like, a selfish act that it makes you despise Cal, which makes you love Jack even more, because Jack seems great.
Too.
Oh yeah, he tried to bribe the guy.
And the guy said no.
The lifeboat captain.
Yeah.
He was like, nope, not at all. So what do you think, like, the forbidden love brings to artists? Because we talked about how audiences are engaged to this kind of, like, conflict. They're engaged to the two different worlds colliding, and of course the relationship between these characters. What do you think it, like, provides artists in terms of storytelling opportunities?
You go first. Just elaborate a little through your opinion.
Like, when I think of these kinds of stories, I think artists have a lot of good ways to contrast characters, because you're looking at these two different worlds. You're looking at this love that is forbidden. And love is one of the most universal concepts in the world. Most stories are in some ways about love or death, right? Mm-hmm. And when it comes to stories about love, this forbidden type love creates these two worlds, creates the conflict is already built into it, that it allows these creators to dig into exactly, like, what are like these characters, what makes them tick, what makes their relationships work, what makes certain relationships not work. Like Rose's relationship with her fiance Cal doesn't work because of these reasons, and Rose's relationship with Jack works because of these reasons. And I think it's kind of the opposites attract, because Rose and Jack come from two very different worlds, but because they kind of like complete each other, like two halves of a whole, like a yin yang, you know? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Cal is more of just like completely from that like rich part of the world, and so it doesn't captivate Rose in the same way.
Right. I think it's definitely a jab too at like the difference between third class and first class societies almost. And we did talk about this, the way they used color, how the third class always seemed dirtier whenever they were on screen, and the first class always seemed so pristine and clean. But I would argue that Rose isn't exactly different to Jack, because she seems to enjoy all the things that Jack is into, all the things he tries to get her into as well.
Yeah, so but what I mean by like they're different is that they come from two different like upbringings. Mm-hmm. So Rose comes from a rich upbringing. Meanwhile, we can kind of tell Jack comes from a poorer one. Mm-hmm. So what they've been through in the world, the environment surrounding them has been different. Not saying like they have very similar personalities, and I think that's what makes their chemistry work so well. Is their personalities are very similar. They're both adventurous. They're both pretty. They're both kind. But their surroundings, their upbringing has been different. And I think that's what a lot of people mean by opposites attract when it comes to relationships, is you shouldn't be completely opposite to someone, but having certain things that are opposite and then having certain things that are the same create a nice mix that make it so that you have an interesting relationship with someone.
That makes sense.
So moving on from relationships, let's talk more about like the history of the Titanic. So the Titanic is one of the most talked about tragedies in modern history. But with events like these, there are bound to be some conspiracy theories. There are arguments that the Titanic never sunk, that it was sunk on purpose, or one that I actually saw from Film Theory on YouTube, that Jack is actually a time traveler, and that he was the one he came back in time to make sure the Titanic sunk. So what do you think of, first, the real-life conspiracies surrounding the Titanic and why it sunk, and was it on purpose, was it on accident, whatever? And second, the conspiracies regarding characters in the movie, such as, was Rose making it up the entire time, or was Jack a time traveler?
Mm-hmm. It would be very... I feel like Rose is just senile in this movie, and she's making all of this up to get some sort of payment out of it, maybe.
Really?
I feel that's what it strikes me as, almost. It may be, like, just poor acting on the old lady that plays Rose's part, but...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I actually think that... I don't think that. I think she is telling the truth. Could you give me some, like, reasoning behind why you think she's not telling the truth?
It's the way she talks.
It's the way she talks?
Yeah. It feels to me like she's making it up. I couldn't give you a quote. I couldn't replicate it. It just, the way she talks sounds so fabricated to me.
I didn't really pick up on that. I could see, like, you thinking that she's, like, not telling the truth because there's no records found on Jack, that she's really old, and that she has, like, this... They said she has an actress-type background, right? Yes. And so she'd be good at, like, improv and lying.
Yeah.
And that there may be a few holes in her story. However, most of her story is pretty accurate and wouldn't really work if it was, like, made up. Either that or she'd have to research it very heavily.
Right. I feel like she was on the Titanic for certain, but embellished so much of it, like the heart of the ocean, right? That's what the pendant's called?
The heart of the ocean, but we saw that she had it in the end.
Right. That's fair.
She threw it out into the ocean. So maybe her story was embellished, but I don't think it was fake.
True.
I think everyone embellishes things, though, because that's just how, like, humans remember things.
But to what extent does a person normally embellish something?
I'd say like a 20%-ish.
20% embellishment? I'm going to go off on a limb and say that this is at least 50% embellishment.
Whoa, that's... I don't know. Most of this feels very... There are a few things, but most of this feels very real.
Gun chase in the middle of a sinking boat.
Sure.
Sure.
Cal was like unstable.
That's true. He was very unstable.
He needed to like go see like a therapist or something because he was narcissistic too. He was a narcissistic, terrible human being, and I really wanted to see him bite it. But anyways, more theories, right? So when it comes to the real life sinking of the Titanic, there's a lot of theories around it, and one of them is that the Titanic was sunk on purpose. So J.P. Morgan, one of the like owners of the White Star Line company, he was basically trying to push the Federal Reserve, right? He wanted that to become a thing. He wanted to boop it right into reality. However, there were a ton of like millionaire people that didn't want that to happen, and most of those people were on the Titanic, or at least a few of them. Now it is a little bit flawed of a theory because some of them only decided to go a few days beforehand, and there's also just a few other like little things that kind of add up for it not being like too real. But there's also another one where they say a mummy case was on there that was cursed that caused it to sink, or that they actually swapped the Titanic out with the Olympic because the Olympic had a hole in it and the Titanic had a better insurance like coverage, and so they sank it on purpose.
Wouldn't that be more? The Titanic is larger and more expensive, though, right?
They're not identical, but they are very similar.
Okay.
So I'm not saying it would happen because it would take so many people to keep something like this secret. Because what you would need to do is you would need to change the name of the Olympic to the Titanic and then repaint you have to put the whole number on there because the whole number is different, right? And you would need to do this in broad daylight while everyone's watching and keep it a secret.
Yeah. Doesn't seem very likely. Back to the mummy one.
The mummy one is so interesting that like I think it's genuinely like hilarious because so there's this mummy case, right?
Okay.
And it was found in Egypt, and the mummy was never found, just the case, right?
Oh, okay.
So the English brought the mummy case to Great Britain, and everyone who had it had great misfortune fall upon them. One person died, or actually two people died. One person got dismembered, two people went missing, and it was bad luck. And guess where the case was during the Titanic's voyage?
Where?
It was on the Titanic in the storage area.
Oh.
Where we saw the car, Jack and Rose getting steamy. We're going to gloss over that scene, though. Talk more about the mummy case. That one also is a little bit flawed because some say that the mummy case was still in the museum where it was housed. Nowadays, people say that it's just housed in a museum in Australia. So it's another one of those like flawed theories. But I think when it comes to events like this, we try and make these conspiracy theories to make more sense of events that don't make sense to us.
Yeah.
Because if there's so much going on, and seeing a tragedy like this, you can't think that it's an accident. It's so big and it's so hard for our brains to understand that we make connections with other things to try and like cope with it.
Right. It does feel so nearly unaccidental. It's so many things just don't add up about it.
Yeah, I agree. But let's skip over the real life ones, go back to the movie. Jack's a time traveler.
This is incredible.
This is a crazy theory that I love. Because, I watched that video on it, and I thought, like, there's no way that Jack's a time traveler when he first, like, put out that claim. However, it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Mm-hmm. So, the main reasons that he thinks Jack's a time traveler is Jack has two specific details that wouldn't make sense unless he was born way later. Like the lake where he grew up and went ice fishing. Mm-hmm. That didn't exist till 2 years after the Titanic sunk. Same with the roller coaster. And actually, the bag that he had wasn't even invented till the 1930s.
What was his bag? I don't think I saw the bag.
It was like a certain knapsack that the Swedish military used and became really popular in like 1939, 1943, that kind of range.
I gotcha.
But further than that, the reason Jack would do this is because if Rose jumped off the Titanic, if Jack wasn't there, right, then they would need to turn around, they would need to go pick up Rose, and they would need to, beeline it to New York. Mm-hmm. But by that time, the iceberg that hit them would have already moved because icebergs move at like 0.7 kilometers an hour or something.
Yeah. And
they would have missed the iceberg. The Titanic would have made it to New York. Titanic never sunk. Now we're looking multiple years later, during like the start of World War I, where the Titanic would be sunk by a German U-boat. Because similar, I believe it was the Britannia that was sunk?
Yes.
Or the Lusitania?
No, the Lusitania.
Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat, but that was a British ship. Now imagine if an American ship got sunk. We would immediately be in war.
Yeah.
That would we would jump into World War I way too early when our military was not even close to the strength of other countries. We only had about 650,000 soldiers, while other countries had millions.
Right.
And in addition to that, our supplies that helped boost the Allies would be burned out too quickly. So overall, that's the idea is Jack came back specifically just to save Rose so that everyone on the Titanic would die to save everyone else's lives and to make sure the Allies won World War I.
That's such a stretch, and I love it. What does that add narratively to Jack?
It makes him like a hero, I guess. It makes him like...
It makes it so much deeper. Like, especially in his monologue, I think specifically it was monologue at dinner with everyone about how he lives his life not knowing what's going to happen next, how he just rolls a die every day.
Make it count, yeah.
Make it count.
He's making this moment count. He's stopping World War I.
Yeah.
So, crazy theory. But also another reason behind this is that almost all of James Cameron's movies are either like sci-fi or there's some sort of time travel movie. So it's just wild how many connections you can make. Yeah. And it makes sense. Like, it's not like out of nowhere. Like, there's definitely connections there. I think something that might throw it off a little bit is it's just so out there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I need a James Cameron movie where all of this is true. The Mummy is there. What is it? The Britannia, right?
Yeah.
Or Britannica. Or Britannia.
Lusitania?
No, the one that you said.
It's the three ships that were made were the Olympic, the Titanic, and I believe the Britannic.
Which one was the theory from earlier where they swapped two?
They swapped the Olympic and the Titanic.
The Olympic, okay.
So the actual Titanic is called the Olympic and went on to have a really successful sailing career, but that's just a theory.
No, okay. So they put the Mummy on the one that was actually going to sink, took that one out. He traveled back in time. I just want a James Cameron movie where all of this is canon. That would be funny.
It's just all the theories combined into one.
Yes.
That'd be such a mess of a movie, but I'd love it. All right, so let's move on from all these theories. Let's talk about the set, and just the production of the movie. At the time, Titanic was the most expensive movie ever made, costing around $200 million, and that's like 1990s money, so that's expensive. This was partly due to the scale of the Titanic, both literally and the scale of the set, where they created an 80% replica. They created 80% of the Titanic to 90% scale, which is huge. And they only created one side of it, so they kind of created the top deck and then just one side of the hull.
How much money was this?
$200 million. This is for everything. Like, this was one of the biggest productions in the history of Hollywood at the time, because there were so many extras and stuff. And what do you think? Like, this kind of this much like stuff and this giant replica of the Titanic, what do you think it adds to the movie?
It adds the sense of realism that it needs, I think. I don't think it would have worked if it was CGI, right? Or anything of the sort.
Part of it was CGI. Like, the people falling into the ocean was CGI.
No, right.
But
I mean, like,
a CGI version of the Titanic wouldn't have had the scale.
No.
It feels epic.
Yeah.
You know? And this is one of those, like, historical dramas where you need it to be epic, because the sinking of the Titanic was a huge event. And so, even though it was expensive, I feel like the practicality of having this giant ship, they actually made a giant ship as the set. I think it makes it so real. Along with the, the scene where the ship goes fully 90 degrees? Well, how they did that is they created a teeter-totter so that the ship can go, they just created the front half, pretty much, or the front fourth, and it would teeter up to 90 degrees.
Right.
And the first time they tested this, the cable that was supposed to bring them back down snapped. So all the people were stuck 90 degrees, hundreds of feet in the air.
Oh, no.
For 30 minutes, including the producer's wife and son.
That's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, luckily no one was hurt during that because, safety precautions and whatnot. But isn't that so interesting that it adds to the movie too? Like you can feel the size of the Titanic when it's going fully vertical.
It adds such a grand scale. It's epic. It's incredible.
It is. It's a very epic movie along with a nice love story to go along with it.
I do have a question. Did they genuinely sink their model of it?
Did they genuinely sink the model?
Yes, of the Titanic.
I don't know. I think they definitely sunk part of it. But, like, what do you think?
I was thinking that they just pumped water into it and shot it practically.
Okay, I'm looking it up right now. It was a combination of practical sets and CGI. So they definitely sunk part of it, but they didn't sink it all.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
Because I'm sure that would have been like a crazy feat and would have been way more expensive than $200 million.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But overall, yeah, it was a lot of it is a mix between this CGI and practicality. And one of the coolest places where you could find this practicality is when the ship's flooding and Jack and Rose are inside. Mm-hmm. They had this giant tank and they filled it with water. And they were only able to do these kind of scenes once because it would destroy all the furnishings on the set. But it adds to it, you know? There's like a sense of urgency there and you can feel it, you know?
Yeah.
It looks real. It feels real. It feels like this epic tragedy that's happening in real time, and you're there with the characters. Mm-hmm. And on the topic of sinking, we're going to go to details in a second. And one of the details I really wanted to point out was that the sinking part of the movie, or the part back in 1919, I believe, is when the 1912, the way back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. That takes about 2 hours and 40 minutes of the movie. So cutting out all the present day stuff, it takes around 2 hours and 40 minutes for like the past part of the movie. Mm-hmm. That is the exact amount of time it took for the Titanic to sink.
Really?
Approximately. And the I believe the iceberg collision is also timed as well. Like that's the amount of time it collided with the iceberg. But it's crazy the attention to detail that James Cameron showed throughout the movie. Do you see any of these details like throughout it?
I don't know if I noticed any details like that in particular. I didn't know much about the Titanic before this conversation. What did you notice?
Not exactly noticed, but more researched, because I got really interested after that. But James Cameron took like 12 excavations to the Titanic to see what it looks like. He told every single extra on set their specific backstory for their character, which is so much of like a D&D thing to do. It's like if you're like a dungeon master in a D&D game, you have all these backstories for your little NPCs, and James Cameron has that attention to detail in this movie. He's telling these people, oh, here's why you're on the Titanic. This is what your name is. This is your favorite food. This is your mom's maiden name, you know? And I just think it's great. The entire movie is great. The song "My Heart Will Go On" by Celine Dion stayed on the Billboard charts for 10 straight weeks as number one played on the radio.
10 weeks?
What do you think it adds to the movie? Like, what do you think that specific song?
It definitely adds that, like, head above the clouds romantic feel, I think. But
yeah, and when it comes to that romantic feel, it's also because of the chemistry between the actors.
Yeah.
Kate Winslet, Leonardo DiCaprio, they got along really well. Mm-hmm. And they are actually still texting to this day. They text each other back and forth Titanic quotes. Which is such like a little cute thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the movie great. It's epic. It's a great love story. It's a great one to watch during like February, especially towards Valentine's Day, because it's a mix of not only like love, but of this heartbreaking tale of tragedy and how like it could have been like avoided. And one of the reasons it couldn't be avoided is because the guys didn't have binoculars. But it's a great movie. I definitely would recommend watching it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's agreed. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. But remember, near, far, wherever you are, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time on Rebel Film Friday.